Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into the English Standard Version of the Bible. You probably know it as the ESV. Our goal here is to unpack this ancient text from two really fascinating angles. First, we'll look at the absolutely painstaking translation channel required to bring ancient languages into modern English. And second, we'll see how that incredibly meticulous process actually shapes the foundational stories of the Old Testament. Get ready, because the sheer scale of this literary endeavor is mind-blowing. Think about it. When you actually hold a physical copy of the ESV Bible, you're holding a text that carries a massive, almost incomprehensible responsibility. We're talking about taking scriptures that are thousands of years old, originally written in ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, and bringing them into modern English, and doing it without losing a single drop of their original meaning, nuance, or power. It's a tall order. It literally took a dedicated team of over 100 people, including a 14-member translation oversight committee just weighing every single word to ensure they honored that original text. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First, the Word of God. Then, the translation channel. Third, the dawn of creation. Fourth, Exodus and the law. And finally, holy living and covenants.
Moving right into Section 2, the translation channel, preserving ancient voices.
Now, you have to remember, the ESV doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It stands in the classic mainstream lineage of English Bible translations going back half a millennium. That whole stream started way back in 1526 with William Tyndale's New Testament. From there, the legacy flowed right through the legendary King James Version in 1611, the Revised Standard Version in 1952, and finally arrived at the English Standard Version, published in 2001. The entire goal of the ESV was to carry forward that historic legacy, that accuracy, simplicity, and dignity for a brand new century. But to actually pull that off, translators had to make a huge philosophical choice right out of the gate. Do they use a thought-for-thought approach or an essentially literal one? You see, some modern Bibles go with thought-for-thought, which dynamically translates concepts but can sometimes lean heavily on the translator's own interpretations or modern cultural shifts. The ESV, though, they went essentially literal or word for word. They wanted the English to act like a transparent window straight to the original text. So they mapped English words as closely as humanly possible to the original grammar and syntax. This lets you see the exact structure those ancient writers actually used.
Now, what's really interesting here is how these strict translation rules apply to incredibly sacred concepts. Take the personal name of God, which was introduced to the Israelites in the Old Testament. The ancient Hebrew consonants are YHWH. Scholars call this the Tetragrammaton. Because the Jewish people consider this name entirely too holy to ever speak aloud, they would substitute it with the Hebrew word Adonai, meaning Lord. To faithfully represent that profound reverence while still being perfectly accurate, the ESV translates YHWH as Lord, but, and here's the clever part, they print it in small capital letters. That way, the reader always knows exactly which ancient name is being invoked.
Section 3. The dawn of creation. In the beginning.
I want you to stop and consider this for a second. How exactly does a literal word-for-word translation frame the beginning of literally everything? When you strip away all the modern paraphrasing and filler, what does that raw ancient voice sound like when it describes the dawn of creation?
Well, it sounds like this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. These foundational verses from Genesis 1 completely demonstrate the narrative power these translators were fighting to preserve. The ESV really seeks to retain that raw simplicity and the dramatic weight of the ancient prose.
And as creation peaks, we hit Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image. Now, looking at this through the lens of translation, notice the word man. The ESV very carefully retains this word, because the original Hebrew word Adam is the generic term for mankind, which, yes, later becomes the proper name Adam. By translating it literally, the ESV preserves the original collective sense of the entire human race being created in the divine image, capturing those exact grammatical nuances. Which brings us to Section 4, Exodus and the law, deliverance and rules. So, we find ourselves at that truly awe-inspiring moment at the burning bush. God reveals his name to Moses, saying, "I am who I am." And this connects directly back to that tetragrammaton concept we talked about earlier. The name YHWH is intrinsically tied to the Hebrew verb to be. It's a massive declaration of absolute independent existence. The ESV captures this pivotal moment with such profound clarity, really setting the stage for the liberation of an entire nation.
But once the Israelites are finally freed from slavery in Egypt, they arrive at Mount Sinai, and a newly freed nation desperately needs structure, right? So the big question becomes, how did God organize this new society? What were the foundational rules given to them out there in the wilderness? It all begins with this incredibly emphatic declaration in Exodus 20. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Notice the absolutely crucial context here. Before issuing even a single commandment, the text establishes the speaker's identity as their deliverer. These rules aren't framed as arbitrary, dictatorial demands. They're framed as a natural response to a massive act of salvation.
From there, the text lays out the 10 Commandments, setting up a very clear moral framework. Keep the Sabbath holy, honor your parents, do not murder, do not steal, do not lie. And, whether you're viewing these texts purely as history or as deep theology, the specific words translated here have undeniably shaped centuries of human law and ethics all across the globe. It's truly foundational stuff.
Moving to Section 5, Holy Living in Covenants, a set-apart people. And this brilliantly illustrates the overarching theme of these books. You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. This one verse from Leviticus pretty much defines the entire purpose behind the strict, separating laws established for Israel. According to the text, they weren't just following rules to keep the peace. They were being actively commanded to reflect the very nature of the God who saved them. This call to holiness translated into some incredibly specific laws meant to build a just society. For instance, Leviticus 19 commands farmers not to strip their vineyards bare, but to actually leave the gleanings for the poor and the sojourner. It commands them not to lie or deal falsely. And Deuteronomy echoes the command to execute justice for the fatherless and the widow. When you read these statutes word for word in the ESV, it reveals an astonishing moral depth. You're looking at a society explicitly designed to protect the most vulnerable. Right at the center of all these laws is the ultimate covenantal vow, the famous Shema found in Deuteronomy 6. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. This transparent translation style of the ESV genuinely brings the ancient, powerful rhythm of these Hebrew words straight into our English vernacular. But let's be real for a minute. Reading through this text, we run into some massive narrative tension. What actually happens when the people inevitably fail to keep these incredibly strict commands? We see this happen so dramatically in the golden calf incident, where the Israelites fall right into idolatry at the very foot of Mount Sinai. How does a holy God respond to such a blatant breach of the covenant? Well, God's response to their failure is captured in Exodus 34:6. As he passes before Moses, he declares himself the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. The translation here beautifully balances the severe strictness of the divine law with an expression of profound, overwhelming mercy. It illustrates a deity who keeps covenants even when the people break them. So the crucial point is summarized perfectly right here in Deuteronomy 8:3. Man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. The text itself frames the Word of God as far more than just a set of historical documents. It's framed as literal, life-giving, spiritual sustenance for humanity. And honestly, this is exactly why the translators of the ESV labored so intensely over every single phrase. Finally, the enduring legacy of the Word. I want to leave you with this final thought. As these ancient texts continue to deeply shape our modern culture, our laws, and our personal ethics, what new nuances, what echoes of ancient voices might you discover when you sit down and read them word for word? The window has been pushed wide open by these translators. All that's left is for you to look through it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.